Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome into another Big Apple Blitz here. I am Matt O'Leary, joined as always by my good buddy Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how are you today?
I'm doing as well as any Jets or Giants fan can do. I mean, listen, at least we got the holidays coming up. We get a nice little break and we get to relax and enjoy some time with family, friends, loved ones, all of that. But there's not much to enjoy when you're watching the New York Giants or the New York Jets on Sundays, Mondays, and Thursdays. And every single week, it somehow gets even messier like it did this week for both franchises. So there's plenty to discuss, especially on the New York Jets side of things.
Yeah, another day, another bombshell report from The Athletic calling out Woody Johnson. Today, the story is that Woody Johnson allegedly uses Madden ratings to evaluate talent, put an end to the Jerry Jeudy trade, as Joe Douglas was apparently deep in negotiations with the then Denver Broncos. Apparently, this is just so specific, it's ridiculous. Didn't want to sign John Simpson because of his Madden awareness rating and a whole lot more. But maybe we start there because I feel like that was the one that was circulating maybe the most, is these Madden ratings having an influence. You buying or selling?
I'm selling. I don't believe it. I can't imagine that Woody Johnson's got the PlayStation booted up on a relaxing Tuesday night and going through Madden ratings. Like, there's just no way to me. I feel like this is so ridiculous. And it's just the fact that people are believing it is the real takeaway to me. The fact that the Jets for so long have been so dysfunctional, have been such a mess, and we've heard such ridiculous rumors about them for so long that we've reached a point where something this out of the ordinary and this ridiculous can be perceived as believable. That's the true story to me, because I don't think it's real. I refuse to believe that an NFL owner is looking at a PlayStation for a basis of their opinion. But I just think the fact that people believe it tells you everything that you need to know about the dysfunction in the organization.
Yeah, I think the fact that it does that, one, that it was written into, that you have people believing it, shows that, or just how bad things really are with Woody Johnson at the helm. I think there are really true signs of dysfunction, and maybe the Madden rating thing is a little exaggerated. The part that I do think is fully believable, and where maybe the Madden stuff comes from, is the influence that his kids have on him and just public perception. It's been very well documented, not just this year, but for years, how much Woody Johnson cares about public perception. And, you know, him being on Twitter and like following along what people are saying, is that is definitely true. And you know, whether it's him or he's just getting the information, I do think that there's an influence. And like I said, with the focus on his kids, and there was a Jets website specifically called out and referenced in the article, Jets X Factor. They're more of like, they provide film reviews and more of like analytics stuff. And apparently his kids read that and share some of the information with him. I think if they did actually read that website and share some of that information with their father, I don't think they would have had the 14-year playoff drought. It's really hard to go this long in a league of parity without making the playoffs. So the dysfunction part is what I buy. Some of the details are maybe a little dramatized, but it's clearly not going well here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think there's a hyperbolic language being used and hyperbolic storylines, but I think that at the core of the story, there is truth. There is a heart here that's clearly struggling to beat inside the Jets organization. There's something functionally wrong with the way they operate. I feel the same way about the Giants and the Jets. from the top to the bottom, there's something wrong with the football operations here. And it always comes back to ownership at the end of the day, because when you run out of fingers to point, you run out of people to blame, you have to go to the very top. I do think there is credence to the stories about the children having an influence, as ridiculous as that is. But I think, like you said, if they were truly pointing to certain and specific resources, things probably wouldn't be so bad. I do want to highlight, though, I think it's very interesting because this is now becoming a storyline with both the Jets and the Giants. Both of these organizations are paying a lot of attention to content creators. And I think that's just very interesting, the shift that we're seeing in the modern NFL, because I mean, truly teams used to have basically barriers on their windows, wouldn't let anybody in, no window of insight. And they also wouldn't look out of those windows and see what people are saying about them. They would just worry about what they're doing internally and how to put the best product on the football field. And I think that's still the case for the best organizations in the NFL. I think when the Detroit Lions started with 3-win season under Dane Campbell, they had those barriers all over their windows and doors, and they kept everything internal, and they figured out how to forge forward, keep the talent that they had, and they built a Super Bowl contender. For the Jets and the Giants and all these other dysfunctional teams, I don't think they have that same mentality. And at one point, I'm sure that they did. But right now, I think those windows, there's been a lot of staring out of those windows, and there's been a lot of looking to the outside for information and for perspectives and opinions. And it's had a really negative effect on the operations of the organization. I feel like that's the truth for John Mara. I've said this many times. He's a fan, so when the fans get riled up, it riles him up. And I think there's something similar going on with Woody Johnson, whether that be because his kids obviously are consuming Jets content elsewhere. I'm not saying content is bad. Obviously, I'm not speaking down on my profession and yours. We do great stuff, but the way that we get ostracized by the team in some respects, and the way that they process this information isn't always in good faith nor good practice. And that, I think, is really beginning to plague New York sports teams, in particular the Jets and the Giants.
Yeah, and like obviously this week there was a really big story on the Giant side of things, but I think it's appropriate to bring up now because it's we could talk about it in the Woody Johnson context, we could just talk about it in the show context of the Giants PR department calling a Giants content creator, and Justin in the chat is pointing it out. How do you feel about what happened to Bobby Skinner and over at Talking Giants? What was your reaction to hearing that news?
I have to choose my words carefully on this subject matter. My reaction, truthfully, was welcome to the club, but I'm not going to talk more about that. But it's a bad look when the PR department is making PR nightmares. And it highlights to me that there is a disconnect between John Mara and the people in his front office. I think that's really important to highlight. I always defend John Mara more than I probably should, but I actually really feel bad for the guy because he clearly has a love and a trust for these friends and family members that he employs. Guys like Pat Hanlon, who he's known probably since he was a child, because Pat Hanlon's been around the organization for so long, or at least a middle-aged adult rather than an old senior citizen. He's known the man for a very long time, and he's trusted him, and he's grown with him. So he trusts that Pat Hanlon will handle a situation like this accordingly. So when Pat Hanlon drops the ball on it, it's not a good look for the organization, and it's not John Mara's fault, even though he's going to get the blame for it. So I feel bad for him, but I think it just highlights a lack of communication and a severe amount of dysfunction in the organization, where the owner is putting his trust in the individuals who truly do not have the organization's best interests at heart and do not operate in a professional enough manner to forge a bright future for this team. So it's a complete mess. It's been a complete mess. This is not the first time they've done something like this. The specific person who made that phone call has made other phone calls like it to other creators. But I think that it's something that needs to be put to an end. And whether you're talking Pat Hanlon, Tim McDonald, Chris Mara, all these guys in the front office who are just friends and family members of John Mara, something needs to be done. He needs to take a real strong look in the mirror and take a real strong look at who he has on his staff, who he can and can't trust, and reevaluate literally everything about the organization.
Yeah, and like on that story that we were just talking about, the Giants just lost 35-14, and they're calling up a Giants content creator over a video saying that the GM should be fired. They're concerned about the wrong things. And I think that's true about, Woody Johnson and the Jets. Instead of having a good process and instead of going about things the right way. They're more concerned about public perception. And I think that's how you lead yourself down a road where you are in a spot that's really hard to get out of. And on the Jet side of things with the kids getting involved, there's another story, and we pointed out, them being in the locker room, the video a couple weeks ago that was since deleted, of Woody Johnson calling for Brick to follow him into the locker room. There's one story where apparently Woody Johnson told Mike White that he effing sucks. But then another story came out after the Texans game, which was Jeff Ulbricht's first win. Aaron Rodgers was set to give a game ball to Jeff Ulbricht for his first win, and Brick Johnson's in there and giving another game ball to Garrett Wilson, and yelling and screaming and going off about the Garrett Wilson catch in that game. And it kind of just like took the air out of the room, that they kind of had to stop and wait for the owner's kid to do his thing and give the game ball to Garrett before they kind of get back to what they were doing there. And again, there's no way to know how much of this is true or if it is true at all, but we have seen there's video evidence of Woody and the kids and the family being in the locker room. And I just don't think that's appropriate. I don't think that's the place for the owner and family to be after the game. I think you let the coach and the players deal with the win or loss, whatever, the way that they're going to. And it's just this, like, he always has his like thumb in there and like involved in every single step of the way. And I think that's wrong. I don't think that's the proper way that an owner should be going about it.
I agree with you. I think that it's completely irresponsible and inappropriate to be having children in the locker room speaking to the team. I think that's ridiculous. Like, there's really no way around it. That's a terrible look for the organization. And we know for sure that that's true. That much is true, that the owner's son is in the locker room, because there is video evidence of that. And I will say, to John Mara's credit, his family members that he employs and he keeps involved with the football operations, he does require them to work for a different organization first and then go ahead and get a position with the Giants. It's different here with the Jets because he's literally just taking his kids everywhere with him and having them involved in things that they have no sort of professional background in. So it doesn't make sense. It is, like you said, inappropriate. And I think there's something going on with these two NFL franchises in New York where they run things like a family business. And I get that it's been in the family, it's something they inherit, whatever. I almost wonder if at some point the NFL is going to look at these two major media markets that are being wasted with the Jets and the Giants, and some point be like, you guys need to actually run this like a legitimate business and not a family business. Like, I don't know if it's ever going to get to that point. I know that it did back in the 70s with the Giants because they were so bad for so long. They were a founding franchise. The NFL had to get involved and force them to change their operations. And then they ended up winning 2 Super Bowls in the subsequent decade. I wonder if we're getting to a point where the NFL is going to need to get involved with the Jets and the Giants, force them to re-strategize their business operations and take a more modern and more professional approach, because I think it's necessary. I think it's what needs to happen to turn each of these franchises around. And I just wonder if the NFL is going to start feeling the same way and feel like they need to do something to spur that action.
Can I spin this into maybe being a positive, these articles? Bear with me a second. We discussed how much Woody and in the Giants case as well, like how much they care about public perception. I'm thinking maybe this gets him to a point where he's embarrassed and realizes that he has to change in order for these articles to stop. That's my hope, at least. I mean, maybe he just continues to lean into it and it's like, this is how I do it. And it's eventually going to work because he hasn't shown any signs of actually changing. But my hope is, after there's been 3 of them about Woody Johnson specifically this year, I wouldn't be surprised if there's another one before the end of the season. Would that be enough for him to go, all right, like, clearly, like, this isn't working and this is embarrassing for our team, that has to stop? Am I coping too much, or is there a realistic path to that maybe being the case here?
I don't think you're coping too much. I think it's realistic. I think outside noise and chatter, again, has been influencing both of these organizations, and a hit piece, if you want to call it that, an article like this that highlights dysfunction in the organization, once it gets highlighted to an extreme level, I mean, I think that one of the reasons the Jets are ready to move on from Aaron Rodgers is things like the Enigma documentary and all of his Pat McAfee spots. Like, he's become a spectacle that is difficult to manage. The Jets themselves are becoming the spectacle. Their internal operations are becoming the spectacle that's difficult to manage, and it's making them look terrible. And when that happens, I think sometimes it can forge change. It will actually force them to look inward, point fingers at themselves rather than everybody else, and try to make a change to right this path. So I think articles like this are a good thing. I think that's why The Athletic does great work, and that's why journalists are important, very important in the sports industry, not just for entertainment and media, but for the business of the sports itself. It's very important to have journalism and journalistic integrity, and that's what I think these articles are going to do. They're going to be integral to turning things around for these franchises in the long run. It might be ugly. It might be embarrassing to read these stories and see these quotes and watch all these other fans around the NFL making fun of your franchise, but it's a necessary evil. Like, it's going to hurt. It's going to sting now, but it's going to scar. It's going to become scar tissue in the long run. It's going to make you stronger. It's very necessary for articles like this to bubble to the surface in order to create change.
Yeah. And I think that's how I'm choosing to look at this, because it does suck. It's embarrassing. The Jets are getting clowned today, deservedly so. I mean, they have the longest drought in, professional sports right now for not making the playoffs. And, this is embarrassing allegations about the owner and how they are running things. And, I don't know if what he said to Mike White, what was alleged was the actual truth, but the part that jumps out to me there, and I'm going to continue to hit on, is there is evidence of him being him acting or reacting based off of emotion. And that was a game where the Jets were just eliminated from playoff contention after starting their season 7-4. So it wouldn't shock me if he did say something that maybe out of pocket to a player. And especially, Mike White, who was playing with broken ribs too, which just, adds an extra, shitty element to this. It sucks because we have no idea what's actually true and what's not, but it just makes this organization look like an absolute dumpster fire. And they are a dumpster fire. And I guess that's what's going to happen when you're this bad for this long. I'm just tired of it, man. I want that to stop.
Yeah. I mean, I feel you. I hear you. Obviously, our drought isn't as long as your drought on the Giants side of things, but things are ugly for both teams in different respects. And at the end of the day, it feels like these teams have tried everything: new GMs, new coaches, new quarterbacks, new players, new ways of drafting, new ways of signing players, new ways of managing the cap, and nothing seems to work. And there's always a common denominator, and you have to find the common denominator for the Giants and the Jets. For each of them, it's ownership. And so at some point, ownership needs to take accountability and needs to step back and let somebody else try something. I think that's really what it's going to take to turn these franchises around. That's really where I'm at, because I don't have much optimism for the future of either of these teams. I really feel like hope is becoming a lost cause. Like, I don't have it anymore until the ownerships of these organizations make changes at the top, which is with themselves. I really can't see a way forward. And again, this is coming from a guy who defends John Mara way too much. I actually really like him. I think he's a great human being, and I think he really tries and really wants this team to be successful. I think his barrier to success, though, is himself. I think the same thing with Woody Johnson. These guys seriously need to look at themselves, figure out what changes need to be made, realize that it starts with them and ends with them, and go ahead and move forward and actually get these teams back on the right track.
I want to go back to Johnny Boy had a comment early on in the show. A question for you guys: how can we fire beat reporters? Why would Samini say speculation if it's not completely true? Rossini and Blatt putting something out like this, what does this do? I get the fan frustration, but I don't think policing the media is the way to go about doing it. Do you agree, or you feel differently on this?
I do agree with you. I think, listen, the media is doing its job at the end of the day. This isn't like, I'm trying to equate it to something I saw with the Giants earlier this year. Let's say, for example, when Malik Neighbors went to the Travis Scott concert while he was already out of concussion protocol, but had recently had the concussion, and the media ran with that, made him some supervillain. I don't think it's the same thing, because it's not like they're trying to run a player out of town for having a life outside of football. They're trying to highlight and rightfully criticize the organization for its poor operations that have plagued the franchise for a decade and wronged the fan base for over a decade, for many decades. So again, you might consider this to be an evil action, the fact that they're exposing certain things that are very embarrassing for the fans and the franchise alike, but it's a necessary evil. And you need to have necessary evils. And as long as these articles are being published with the journalistic integrity, they're fact checking, they're checking with all of their sources, they're doing their due diligence. And if they're claiming to do that, and if you find proof that they're doing that, then it's totally fine, as long as they're not making things up out of thin air. But there's a lot of credence to what they're saying. We could see that a lot of it is true. Now, I don't believe in all of it. I'm sure that they were lied to by some of their sources. This could totally be a case of ownership sending out fake stories to see who is the mole. That's possible. We've seen organizations do that. We've seen the Giants do that. In fact, back before they fired Joe Judge, they had several beat writers on the same day come out and say, hey, the Giants are not going to fire Joe Judge. They're planning to stick ahead. And then 3 days later, he was fired. What happened? The Giants were trying to weed out a mole. They ended up firing other people in the front office immediately after firing Joe Judge because they figured out who was telling this information to the media. Possibly that's what's happening with the New York Jets. We've seen it before. Maybe they're trying to send out fake BS information, knowing it's embarrassing and hyperbolic and ridiculous, just to find out who is spreading this fake information and seeing who is going to speak to the media about it. That's a possibility. That's what I really think is happening here. But at the end of the day, like I said, it's a necessary evil. The media is doing its job. The media can make change, and change is needed right now for the New York Jets.
Absolutely. I kind of hope that your theory right there is the truth, because that would show some form of competency. I just don't, I'm not going to give Woody Johnson the benefit of the doubt on it, unfortunately, just based off past history. But again, I hope that's the case, because that gives you a little bit of a sign of a genuine functioning team. So again, another not a dull day in Jets land. We get that report. On the Giants side of things, we can get into the second half of the show here. Shedeur Sanders to the Giants. We have a clip that we can play here of Deion Sanders talking about the Giants having the #1 pick and potentially taking his son, Shedeur Sanders. So we'll play that and then react to it.
I'm about to put God back on the platform right here. All right, put your hand like this for me right quick. We finna pray right quick. Come on. Oh, you can pray anywhere where you want to go. Where you think God gonna take them boys?
Oh, that's a good one. I have no idea. It depends on who's.
All right, I'm gonna just throw it out. All right, hold on. Let me throw it out there. Raiders slide up to get the #1 pick.
Do they have to slide?
Well, they're #2 right now.
Okay, who's one right now?
I think Giants are #1. Giants, right?
Giants are not gonna give up that pick. They're not gonna give up that pick. The Giants are not giving up that pick.
Giants pick #1.
I know that
#1 pick.
Shedeur is gonna be the #1 pick.
If the Giants are #1 pick, who's the #1 pick, Pop?
Shedeur is gonna be the #1 pick.
All right, so Raiders go #2. Who's the #2 pick?
See, that's when the game starts to play. That's when you start playing the game. That's when the Raiders could go with Cam. Okay. Or it could be some junk in the game and the Raiders could take Trav.
I can see that happen. All right,
or they can slide back.
I'll take you off the hot seat. I just want to get you on the hot seat for a little bit.
All right, there we go. So it sounds like he believes that if the Giants have the #1 pick, they're not going to trade out of it, and that they would take Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, he said that he knows for a fact they wouldn't give up that pick if they had the #1 pick, indicating that he thinks they want Shedeur, or he knows that they want Shedeur, and he said that Shedeur will be the #1 pick regardless of who's picking there, including with the New York Giants. I think that highlights many things for Giants fans. It immediately puts to rest the concerns about, will Deion let his son play for the Giants? I think this video makes it very clear and obvious he will not stand in the way of the New York Giants drafting his son. I never really bought into that in the first place. New York is the media capital of the world. The Giants are a storied franchise. Deion historically loves the New York Giants.
Yep.
I have a core memory in my life of that 2011-12 playoff run. with Eli Manning. I used to say this every time Eli would make a big play. I would go, I believe in Eli. Why? Because Deion Sanders would say that on an NFL Network before and after every single game. He had this, it was like this, his run, his whole thing during Eli's run was, I believe in Eli. That's what Deion used to say. He loves the Giants. He respects that organization. Why would he prevent his son from going there? Having an opportunity to turn around one of the most storied franchises that's been in a rut for a decade. Shedeur can go in and step in, turn that around and be the face of that franchise. Yeah, Deion's going to be all over that. Shedeur's going to be all over that. They probably want to go to New York more than anywhere else. Maybe they want to go to Las Vegas. I don't know. But I really never bought into the fact that Deion would prevent his son from going there. And I think this is confirmation that if the New York Giants are picking first overall, Deion expects his son to go there, and he's okay, more than okay, with his son going there and becoming the face of the New York Giants.
I agree with you. I think Deion would be for it. I really do. And I could see Shedeur as a New York Giant. I think the fact that Joe Shane was at all those practices and, obviously taking a long, hard look at Shedeur is big. And then the second part of it too, which is we just talked about it on Monday, the video of Neighbors and Shedeur hanging out, and he already has the Giants ball. Like, I don't know. Sometimes you kind of just got to read the tea leaves that are there and not overcomplicate it. I don't think it's a smokescreen. I genuinely buy it that they do like this kid and would take him.
I agree. I mean, listen, Joe Shane's been to several Colorado football games. He's been to several Colorado practices. And I even saw a video of Brandon Brown, New York Giants assistant general manager, speaking with the team, the Colorado football team, in like a huddle setting and breaking them down and sharing life lessons and advice, saying, hey, you're always being watched. Even when you think you can take a play off and people aren't watching you, somebody's watching you. Sharing advice and like connecting with the Colorado football team. I have a few thoughts on it. I think, first and foremost, I believe that this is the New York Giants ensuring Deion will allow his son to go to the Giants. I think that's really what was at play here. I think they were being strategic and careful to build a rapport with Deion and the Sanders family in order to make sure that the buzz about him not wanting his son to go to New York was put to rest. I think that was smart and clever of the Giants. I think that they're doing their due diligence and practice by scouting him, but I also do not think that they have their mind made up on the quarterback position. I don't think they know for sure that they want Shedeur over Cam Ward. It is far too soon to tell any of that. They might have a preference right now. They might be leaning one way more so than the other, but at the end of the day, we still have the NFL scouting combine to get to. We've got pro days. We've got top 30 visits. A lot can change between now and April. We are talking about 4 full months of a pre-draft process to get through. So while Deion might be confident that his son is going number one, especially if the New York Giants are picking number one, first of all, there's no guarantee that they will be picking number one. They have a higher strength of schedule than the Raiders. So if both teams lose out, they won't be picking number one. And I also am just not convinced that they've made their mind up over the quarterback because it is such a long process. And those combine interviews, more so than anything, are important at the quarterback position. There's a long road to get to the draft.
So I know you're going to be locked into Raiders Jags on Sunday then at 4:25 because that game has a ton of draft implications. And I think that's genuinely a winnable game for the Raiders here. I just watched the Jaguars play the Jets, and Mac Jones is horrible. He's going to turn the ball over a couple times, and that defense is nothing to write home about. I know the Raiders stink too, but they're at home. I feel like they should win this game.
I mean, I agree with you. I think it's definitely winnable for them. Definitely locked in. In many ways, this is like the New York Giants Super Bowl. This is a very important game. But also at the end of the day, I don't know how big of a difference there is between pick 1 and pick 2, especially if I do prefer Cam Ward and I think he's going number 2. I'm fine with picking 2. But realistically, I want this organization to have zero excuses. So I want them to get the number 1 pick. I want them to have the pick of the litter because I don't want them to ever be able to fall back on, well, we didn't get our choice of quarterback. We had to settle for plan B. I don't want that. I want the Giants to have the first overall pick. So that way, if they're wrong about it, they're 100% wrong about it with no built-in excuses. So I don't know. Hopefully it shakes out in their favor. But also for the Giants, they're playing the Falcons. That could be looked at as a winnable game. Falcons are not a good football team. They're really bad. They're starting a rookie quarterback. Maybe the lights are too bright. Could be a blow-up moment. It's totally possible that the Giants win one of these games down the stretch as well. They've got a Colts game coming up that's also, I guess, considered winnable. If anything is winnable for the Giants, I don't really think so. But, it's going to be a tight race to the number 1 pick, and ultimately we're just going to have to see how it ends up playing out. But I'm not so convinced that the Giants are going to be picking number 1.
I have a Giants theory that I wanted to share. I don't think you're going to agree with it, but can you hear me out on why I think that this is going to be the case? So I know you want and think that there's a chance the Giants move on from Joe Shane, but I think the Giants are going to end up scapegoating Brian Dable and keeping Joe Shane. And this kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, or at towards the beginning, with the Giants having that reaction, the PR team, to the video calling for Joe Shane to be fired. I think the part of the reason why they had that such a strong reaction was because that is their plan. They do want to keep Joe Shane, and they don't want the narrative amongst fans for that to be a bad thing. And I do think that him being there for all those practices with Shedeur, and I'm sure if it gets to that point, they'll be in on all the meetings with, Cam Ward also. I think there's a stronger chance that Shane actually ends up staying now because of all this.
I don't disagree with you. Listen, I won't be happy about it if they keep Joe Shane. Obviously, I've made my opinion very clear, my stance very, very obvious. I want a clean house here for the New York Giants. But you're right. If you read through the wording and you kind of look at how the team has operated, it does feel like they are going to stick with Joe Shane and probably scapegoat Brian Dable. And I do personally think that is awful. I think it's a terrible idea. I don't know why you would want a lack of synergy between your coach and GM. And I think that's what you're going to get. The GM has, for the New York Giants, been able to fire a lot of head coaches in recent years and shift blame. But at the end of the day, I fall back on this. When you look at that 2022 season, that roster was terrible. Joe Shane had that offseason to revamp that roster, to make some moves, but it was Dave Gettleman's roster, and it was a bad roster, just with a few Joe Shane upgrades. Who brought home the hardware at the end of the year? Joe Shane did not win Executive of the Year. We have seen rookie executives win Executive of the Year because of the way that they overhaul the roster. He didn't win that award, but who won Coach of the Year? Brian Dable. So if you want to talk about over the last 3 years who has done a better job, you're talking about the guy who won games in seasons where he shouldn't have won a single game, led a team to the playoffs when he shouldn't have led a team to the playoffs, and won a playoff game. It's Brian Dable. Even last year, we were having this conversation. Giants were terrible, all these injuries. They went on that ridiculous run down the stretch with Tommy DeVito. It hurt the team in the long run, but we all said, wow, well, at least we know we've got a good head coach who can win when he's dealt a shitty hand. But now here we are a year later, and we want to fire the head coach who's had the worst hands dealt to him, the worst roster to deal with. Doesn't make sense to me, doesn't add up, and it's very clear and obvious that it's Joe Shane shifting blame and scapegoating a head coach when he is the one at fault. I really wish that the New York Giants decision makers would just realize this. Like, look at the last 3 years. Who has done a better job between those two guys? To me, it's very clear and obvious that it is Brian Dable. And that's not to say he's done a great job or that he is a great coach, but he's done a better job than Joe Shane. So if you're going to fire one of them, it should be the GM, and the new GM should have the option of retaining or firing Brian Dable, in my opinion. Maybe a new GM comes in and is like, I think Dable's a great coach, I'm keeping him. And then he does. I'm fine with that. At least give a new GM an opportunity to wipe the slate clean if they want to. But firing Dable and keeping Shane, I feel like is taking 5 steps backwards.
Yeah, I agree. And Justin says, oh God, please don't say that, Matt. I want both of these guys gone. Listen, that's just my theory of what I think is going to happen. That's not what I would do. And if I was a Giants fan, I would agree. I would want both those guys gone. I don't think Joe Shane has done nearly enough to warrant him coming back for another year. And, Dable did win the Coach of the Year. And I think he did have some, success calling plays with, Tommy DeVito last year, and, them winning a couple games maybe they weren't supposed to. That matters. But again, it just feels like they're trying to scapegoat Dable. That's the vibe that I'm getting. And I hope I'm wrong, because I do hope the Giants clear out and get a new GM and get a new coach and get a quarterback and have everyone on the same timeline. I think that's your best case for success. I just think with the reaction that they had to that video that was put out, clearly that bothered people. And I think there's a reason behind it. And the reason being is that he's probably sticking around.
I agree with you, but I also do feel like the planes flying over MetLife and the noise from fans is going to get into the ear of of John Mara, and I think he is going to make changes. So even though the way the organization is seemingly operating, it looks like they're going to keep Joe Shane and probably fire Dable. I mean, it does look that way right now. Things can and probably will change, in my opinion. I think the noise is going to get loud enough. It's going to get deafening. And I think John Mara is actually going to pony up and make some major changes this offseason, because I think I'm pretty good at making these predictions and understanding the temperature of the organization. Over the last 6 years, I've had a pretty good ability to predict when they were going to make these organizational changes. If I had to make a prediction right now, John Mara is going to clean house, and I think he is going to do what I've been calling upon him to do for the last several weeks. I think he is going to bring in a third party to reevaluate how they operate. I think it's gotten to that point. I think he knows that it's gotten to that point, and I think he's finally going to have to make a change. And you have to keep in mind, he's an elderly man who just wants to see his team win a goddamn Super Bowl. If it means that he needs to step away in order to make that happen, he will do that, because he wants to see them win another championship before he passes through this lifetime. So I think the drastic changes are on the horizon. Age is a factor for John Mara, and fan uproars. That's the biggest factor that there is anytime the Giants make their changes. So I actually do think a house cleaning is coming.
I hope you're right. Genuinely, I hope that's the case. Johnny's got a question for you. And why not Justin Fields and move back and get more capital and fill in more holes that are needed? Are you open to going the free agent route at the quarterback spot?
Why not Justin Fields and the quarterback? That's what I would do. I made this point last night on Giants Collective, and I'll try and repeat it as best as I can in less words, because I probably took up more time than I needed to last night making it. The Giants haven't thrown a dart at the board in 6 years at the quarterback position. The last time they drafted a quarterback, his name was Daniel Jones. Do you understand how ridiculous that is? How almost unfathomable that is, that they went 6 years? I'm talking about all 7 rounds of the draft. They have not taken a single quarterback. That is wild to me, that you wouldn't even try and draft a backup, that you wouldn't even just throw a dart at the board. The problem with the Giants when they drafted Daniel Jones isn't the fact that they drafted Daniel Jones. It's fine practice if you're picking in the top 10. It's the right practice to take a quarterback when you have an opportunity to. The problem wasn't that they drafted Jones. It was that they tried to make it work with Jones. After about 2 years, we knew that he wasn't the answer. That's when the New York Giants needed to move on and go in a new direction. Dragging it out for 6 years, that was the problem. So the problem isn't drafting the quarterback. The problem is being married to the quarterback. You can't be. You have to hire slowly, go through the pre-draft process, slowly come to a decision, and fire quickly once you have your answer. The Giants didn't fire quickly enough. So I said this last night on the show because somebody was asking us, would you rather just wait till 2026, trade down, and look at those quarterbacks? I'm looking at the 2026 quarterbacks for sure. I think Aller's talented. I think Nussmeier's talented. Let's see who else is in that class. But none of them are stopping me from taking a quarterback in 2025. And the quarterback I took in 2025 isn't stopping me from taking another one in 2026 if I really like them. Because you have to throw darts at the board with the quarterback position. You cannot be married to the guy. You have to take chances, because the probability game is what matters at the end of the day. The hit rate on quarterbacks in the first round versus at every other position, there is a major disparity between first-round quarterbacks and every other round quarterbacks versus every other round of every other position. So when you are picking high in the draft and you have an opportunity to take a quarterback, unless you know you have a guy, you have to take one. That's what the probability and data game would say. Maybe that's too analytical and too progressive for most thought processes. I know a lot of people don't like that opinion that I have of firing quickly at the quarterback position. They say you have to give it time to grow and to develop. After a certain amount of time, you know what you have at that position, and you need to make an immediate change, not bring in new coaches and players to turn it around for that player. You just have to keep rolling the dice until you hit on a franchise-altering prospect. That's my thought process on it. That's my opinion. Again, I know it's controversial, but let's see how it plays out over the next few years. If the Giants draft Cam Ward and he looks like a disaster in year one, and then going into his second season, they have the number one pick, they should be talking quarterback again and not trying to just force it to work. Keep throwing darts at the board until you hit a bullseye.
I like that. I really do. I think that's a smart way to look at it. Can I throw one more scenario at you, though? That's not drafting a quarterback. Oh, maybe, I mean, you could still draft a quarterback, but a different free agent option. What if you right the wrong from 2018 and bring in Sam Darnold?
I don't think he has any desire to play in MetLife Stadium or for a New York franchise. So I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's going to happen. And I also don't think that we should be paying somebody that much money, because he's probably going to get like $30 million at this point with the way that he's played. Rather, Justin Fields, I think at the highest he goes is 20. And so that 10 million is a big difference. And he probably doesn't even get 20. He probably gets closer to 10 to 15. So yeah, no way it's going to be Darnold. I think Darnold's really good, but I also think he's going to stick around long term in Minnesota. I think Kevin O'Connell believes he can win some serious football games with him. And maybe they do this season. It's totally possible that they make a deep playoff run and they will run it back on a long-term deal with Darnold. But then if that's the case, I wouldn't be looking to Minnesota to see if Darnold shakes free. I'd be looking to see if McCarthy shakes free. So I want the young guy who's got the potential and the upward ability of growth. And I don't know. It's going to be a really interesting offseason is really what my takeaway from that is.
It absolutely is. And I think for both of these teams, we are due for a busy next few months, especially in January. I think there's going to be a lot of change for both of these teams. I think the Jets are going to be hiring a GM and coach. The Giants, I think there's a chance that they're going to do the same as well. And quarterback might be in play for both of these teams. So a lot of fun coming the next few weeks here for us.
It's going to be a very interesting few months, and there's going to be a lot of controversy around the way for sure. We'll see what the Giants do and their front office and coaching staff. We'll see who the Jets end up hiring in those positions. And at the end of the day, what I really need to see is whether or not ownership makes any fundamental changes to the organization, because that's the only way I'm going to feel like either of these teams have a bright future. If it's just more of the same going forward, I'm not going to feel all that great going into 2025. I'll probably predict another 5-win season for both of these teams. So we'll see how it goes. It's definitely going to be a pivotal offseason, that's for sure.
I hope that's not the case. Guys, that'll do it for us on this episode. Subscribe to the channel here. Check out Anthony's work on Fireside Giants and check me out at Matt O'Leary NY. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we will catch you next time.